I'm Jenni Carlson.
I'm Barry Trammell. Welcome to the Jenni and Berry Show. Joel Embiid has missed 14 games this NBA season and now has undergone surgery that quickly will have him surpass 17 missed games, which would make him ineligible for the NBA's postseason awards. That's good news for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's MVP candidacy, but is it good news for the NBA? We'll talk about the ramifications of the NBA's response to load management.
But first, we want to say a big thanks to these sponsors for supporting the Jenni and Berry Show. The Oklahoma Ford Dealers Association, MidFirst Bank, Next Gen Roofing, Two Fellas Movers, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, 988, Oklahoma's Mental Health Lifeline. Drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. And let's face it, a box of pizza and a case of beer just don't work like they used to. Nobody wants to help you move. We know two fellas who love moving. At Two Fellas Moving Company, we offer free, no-strings quotes for your move. With more than 20 years experience, we've pretty much moved it all. Our services don't end up moving either. Need to do some remodeling or spring cleaning? We've got you covered with dumpster rentals and junk haul services. Remember, all the quotes are free and there are no strings attached. If you're moving in Oklahoma, make sure to call the fellas. Visit twofellas.com for your free quote today. All right, Barry, as we sit here on Tuesday, Joel Embiid has had that knee surgery, meniscus. Sunday evening came the announcement that he was going to undergo the procedure on his left knee. To this point, I've not heard anything that indicates he's done for the season, but obviously that's a fairly significant situation. Sixers say he will miss an extended period of time. He's going to be reevaluated in a few weeks. This all impacts the MVP race, obviously, as you mentioned before, with this new league rule, 65-game minimum to be eligible for postseason awards. And there's no chance at this point that Embiid gets to 65. That rule, obviously, we didn't know who it was going to impact. We figured it would impact somebody at some point. But what about this rule? Is this a misplaced rule when it comes to these postseason awards?
I don't think so. I like the rule. It works on a couple of fronts. At the fundamental core of this rule is protecting the NBA's television partners who basically bankroll the league. And when the 76ers go to Denver for a primetime game on ABC Saturday night, and all of a sudden Joel Embiid doesn't play, ABC's not happy. Same with a big TNT game. And now Joel Embiid clearly is injured. Nobody could do anything about that. But the load management, the resting guys, that has ramifications when it affects the big-time games. This is one way to motivate players to play more, is to make them ineligible if they don't meet the 65 limit. Now there's some downside to this rule. You have players that may feel pressured to play. You may have guys that play. Embiid, conceivably could be in this club, guy who doesn't feel right and still plays. So, but the NBA had to do something, and I think this rule was a good start. Maybe it needs a little tinkering. Maybe it needs more discussion. But the NBA had to do something to minimize the number of stars sitting out of games.
Yeah, I think in Embiid's situation, in my mind, the voters on the MVP and frankly all of the awards, I think we've talked about this before, it's a very savvy voting pool. I mean, for the most part, you've got folks who cover teams, folks who cover the league. They're obviously very aware of, who is playing at a high level. So I think the fact that Joel Embiid, this wasn't like, to me, it doesn't sound like he's going to fall a game or two below that 65-game threshold. We're talking about a fairly significant lack of games for him. So I think in his case, to me, I don't see a situation where he would be in the running just because he's not going to have played enough. Now, he's playing at a very high level, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But, you're right. There's been so many times that guys have missed games, have missed national broadcasts of games, And I get the load management. I mean, 82 games, if you're really playing for the end of the year, the chance that you would need to rest your stars is pretty high. Even a team like the Thunder with a young group of players, they have rested guys. Now, I think you may have had some situations where there was maybe a slight tweak or, something wasn't quite feeling 100%, probably like it would most times, especially late in the year with guys that have played, these long months of the NBA season. They're not going to be 100% healthy. So you're going to have aches and pains. But maybe earlier in the season, you do sort of find time to rest guys and play it safe when it comes to those games where they might not, they could have played if push comes to shove, but they decide not to. But I think in Embiid's situation, it's not obviously he's going to fall well below that. And then Barry, I mean, that brings Shai Gilgeous-Alexander up at least a peg in the MVP race. I don't know if Embiid's a slam dunk necessarily to win MVP, but he was scoring a league-leading 35.3 points a game, on pace to join Wilt Chamberlain as the only player to average 35 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. This guy's having a heck of a year. It's just too bad that he really can't stay healthy, Barry.
Yeah, it is. He's sort of had the star-crossed NBA season, sits out his first 2 years out of Kansas before he gets to play for the Sixers. And with all the drama around the James Harden trade, the James Harden intrigue, and they go ahead and make the deal. People didn't know how, wasn't the greatest of deals. Did they get enough? Do they have enough? Well, they come out and play very well. Tyrese Maxey becomes a star. Joel Embiid plays unbelievable. His season has not been respected enough. Joel Embiid is actually scoring. Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50.4 points a game in 1961-62. Joel Embiid is scoring at the same clip as Wilt Chamberlain per minute. I mean, Wilt Chamberlain played over 48 minutes a game in 1961-62. He didn't come off the court. That's not really viable in the 21st century. Joel Embiid's averaging, he's averaging a point a minute, averaging 35 minutes, 35 points. We haven't seen a season like this in forever, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think he was going to win the MVP ahead of SGA, ahead of Jokic before the injury because the Sixers were in contention. They were playing well. It's just another chapter in the Joel Embiid sort of sad saga.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned this before, the rule of, the game minimum and why it's there. And sort of, could it have some unintended bad consequences, forcing, injured or hobbled or less than 100% players to play when they might not feel like it? I haven't heard that that's happening yet, Barry. I don't know. Is it a matter of time before we get to that situation? Or when you're talking about stars, when you're talking about guys in the MVP race, sort of feel like they're going to direct the boat when it comes to this stuff. If they don't feel like they can play, I don't think they're going to play. Maybe I'm wrong, but that could be an unintended consequence, but I sure haven't gotten the sense like it has been yet. I know we're early in it, but I haven't seen it yet. What about you?
Well, to me, this is a rule that has shifted the burden of motivating players to play. It shifts the burden from the teams to the player. If Joel Embiid is not eligible for all NBA or if he's not eligible for MVP, that really doesn't hurt the franchise. It hurts the player. So the player is the one who has to sort of weigh the ramifications. Is it worth playing? So this has been an issue really since the Spurs invented load management 10, 15 years ago. And Greg Popovich often would sit his stars, Tim Duncan or Kawhi Leonard, whoever it might be, on a primetime game, TNT, and the league would be outraged, and Greg Popovich did not, nor does not care. So the league felt hamstrung. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And they tried to make the schedule. I think the league could improve the scheduling. If you've got when you schedule these primetime games, the TNT doubleheaders, the ABC games, don't make them part of a back-to-back. Just when you make the schedule, that's a blackout date before and after. Those guys, so those kinds of things would help. But I do think this helps on the player side. I think if you're SGA and you were facing a potential minimum number of games for awards, I think you'd be motivated to play more. I think same with Joel Embiid in Philly. I don't think he wanted to not win the MVP. I don't think he wanted, and I think he cared if he makes All NBA.
Yeah.
Maybe Kawhi Leonard doesn't, but most players do. So I think it was a good faith effort by the league to find a way to get players to play. It may need some tinkering. It may need some revamping, but I do think the league is serious about its players playing. Who was it? Last week, Denver comes to town, and Jokic didn't play.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a story out about, there's a big Denver fan in the Oklahoma City area bought tickets for this game. Just, their son wanted to see Jokic play, and he doesn't play. That's bad PR for the league, but that's just life. Sometimes things don't go the way we want them to, but, some kid in Oklahoma City the league can live with. Some network called TNT upset they can't live with.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember Kobe Bryant's last year in the league. The Lakers came through Oklahoma City twice, and it was their final road game. So his final road game he played, but the game before, there was a huge, hubbub. People were excited. I think it was maybe a Saturday game, so people could, it was weekend. People could get there. People from out of town could get there. Lots of people paying, big money to see Kobe. And a few hours before the game, Lakers announced he's not going to play. And Kobe, to his credit, he did a media availability before the game, which when you're not playing, that's not a mandated sort of thing. He could have easily not done that. But part of what he did was say, I understand. I get it. I'm sorry. I wish I could play. So he was, as stars all go, I thought he was pretty forthcoming about the why, but it didn't change the fact that people who came to see him play instead got to see him sit at the end of the bench. So it's not the same. And you're right. I mean, I think it does affect fans, but more than that, it affects that TV audience. And you were talking about Popovich, and my favorite aside to that was when he didn't play those guys as they got a little bit older in their careers. It was a DMP. I don't even think he put coach's decision. It was just old.
Yeah.
He just put old. And that's what appears on the play-by-play. You can go find those box scores from back in the day and still see DNP, old. And so that was the original load management. And obviously it was great for the Spurs because they won tons of championships. But now as these TV deals are bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're going to continue to get bigger, TV needs to have some sort of idea that we're going to get these guys on the floor. We're going to get to see these matchups. So the idea that this rule could be rescinded, should be rescinded, I can't imagine it, Barry. I don't think the TV networks would allow it. I think they can't know for sure, but I think they like having a little bit more of an idea that they're going to get to have these guys on the floor.
Yeah, and the networks have looked at things like a decrease in the rights in the payment they owe if certain players, as we're paying you $1 million less if Joel Embiid doesn't play in Denver or something like that. And the truth is, the players don't really care about that. Now, overall income for the NBA means the salary cap goes down by a fraction. That really doesn't affect anybody. Much less a Joel Embiid. So those kinds of things don't really work. But taking the carrot away of an MVP or an All-NBA, I would think that does work. Most players like that status. Indiana is Tyrese Halliburton is playing 20 minutes a game, or was, and as he's sort of coming back from an injury because he wanted to be in contention for whatever might be out there. In a previous year, he might just say, I'm going to sit for the next 4 games rather than piecemeal it together game by game by game. So 20 minutes of Tyrese Halliburton, if you're an NBA fan, is better than no minutes. So I think it's working. I think the rule had some unintended consequences, perhaps, but I do think it's working.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And, obviously, I don't think anybody in the NBA, wanted Joel Embiid to be sidelined for a big portion of this season. Obviously, a guy like that you want to see play. But now it begs the question, with him out of the MVP race, what now? I mean, we've talked about Jokic a little bit. He seems to be the favorite amongst the odds makers. Obviously, SGA, Giannis, Luka. Guys like that are kind of always being in the conversation. But as it relates to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, what's the strongest case for him? I mean, obviously he's playing at a really high level. The Thunder are playing at a really high level. But as you look at what he's done to this point and what he has a chance to put on tape, put on, box scores, what makes the strongest case for SGA in this whole conversation?
I tend to think there's about 3 great points. One is this: he's the leader of a breakout team that's very young, and this is a team that went from lottery tanking 2 years ago to the play-in tournament last season, now to number 1 in the West as we approach the All-Star game, and he is clearly the engine that makes the Thunder go. Number 2, his season is historic in its efficiency. He is producing like very few guards in the history of the NBA. Most great guards, even the all-timers, the Kobe Bryants, the whoever you want to put on that list, do not have the efficiency numbers of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's over 50% shooting. He's remarkably consistent. A guy that guys who score 30 points or more do not shoot over 50% unless they're big man. It just doesn't happen. And yet it's happening with SGA. So it's historic in what he's doing. And number 3 is just his overall quality play. He's good on the other end too. Very good, blocking shots, leads the league in steals. Yeah. That's not the greatest indicator of defensive prowess, but when you put those together, it's a pretty formidable stat. And plus, he's playing good foundational defense. So he's just an all-around star, highly productive. And, his team is on fire. And I don't know what else you could want out of an MVP candidate.
Yeah, it's a strong case. Jokic, though, I mean, you can't argue that he's unbelievable talent. I mean, you're looking at 2 guys that are, we've talked, the unicorn phrase has come up as it relates to Chet Holmgren. But when you look at these 2 guys, they're unicorns in their own right. Maybe not as physically such, but the way they play is it's their own unique way of playing. Jokic, you mentioned, Barry, the high point average SGA before the Utah game as we sit here on Tuesday morning. SGA sits at 31.3. Jokic is a little lower, 26.3. So advantage to SGA there. But in a lot of other categories, field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, rebounds per game, obviously, Jokic being a bigger guy. But even assists per game, Jokic is higher than Shai is. So as unique as a game as Shai has, you've got this big man who handles the ball, who distributes the ball. Really, it's going to be interesting to see as these 2 teams, obviously the West, there's still a lot to shake out in the Western Conference, but where Denver and where Oklahoma City finish could have as much of an impact on the MVP race as anything, because I think if you are paying attention and you look around the West, you see that, even though there are teams that have started to separate, there are so many teams that maybe even out of the playoff, if you looked at the standings today, that are going to make charges. We know that there's going to be teams that are really talented that are going to make this interesting. So if Denver, if Oklahoma City, if one of those teams can finish at the top of the West, I think that's another feather in the cap for these two guys as the MVP race comes down, because they both have things about their stat lines, their seasons, their averages that frankly are eye-popping. You look at it and you just think, how can this be true? How can a guy that, is that big play that much of an outsized role in running the offense in Denver? How can a player of Shai's, stature, really not, a big guy? How can he get so many point paints? How can he be that efficient? There's just so much about both of these guys that I think is fascinating. And then I think, Barry, there's the issue of, Shai, obviously first team All-NBA a year ago, but he's not really been in this MVP conversation to this point. And the guys that I mentioned before, whether it's Giannis, Luka, who hasn't won one, but it's been in the conversation, Jokic, Embiid before he gets hurt, these have kind of become the names that percolate up there every year. So is Shai up against more than just players? Does he have to sort of be in this conversation for a while before he elevates to the point of actually winning the darn thing?
I don't think so. For instance, what you described is sort of the team as well, right? When we talk about NBA title contenders, do they have to go through it, suffer the bumps and bruises of a playoff run, and learn to be experienced and rugged and all those things? The answer is probably. That's the way it works. We've got a long history of that. I don't think the same thing holds true necessarily for players. I do think there is a route for SGA to win the MVP. I think people recognize his game. I think they respect his game. I think the Thunder playing at such a high level puts him in that. If the Thunder was, I don't know, sixth seed in the West, he's not in this discussion. But at number one in the West, he's most definitely in the discussion. And his play, the one thing I don't like about MVP discussions is when you make a case for one guy, is if you slip into the denigration of the other guy.
Right.
I got nothing bad to say about Jokic. Unbelievable player, epic player, Hall of Fame player, mountain peak player, the kind of player we've never seen before. You talked about his assist rate and all that. I mean, he's playing a game that we've seen very few, maybe zero people ever play. If Jokic is the MVP again, hey, I salute him. So I'm not trying to debate between the two guys. I'm just saying SGA is historically productive himself. He's on a great team that's got a great story, and it's a great story because of their leader, SGA. So he's as valuable to Oklahoma City as Jokic is to Denver. We're splitting hairs here. We usually do when it comes to an MVP and in most professional sports. So I'm good. I won't cry foul if Jokic wins. I won't listen to cries of foul if SGA wins.
Yeah, I would say either one would be a very worthy MVP. Now, I think it could come down to who finishes higher in the West, Barry. Mm-hmm. I think if one of those two teams wins the West, I think that could be the determining factor. Because like you said, it is hair splitting. And if one of those teams finishes 1 or 2 and the other one falls to 4, or, I don't know, out of home court advantage, I think that might determine it. To me, if they keep playing at this same level, and we've got no indication that they're going to let up, I think it comes down to who finishes higher. I think that wins it or loses it for one of these guys.
No, I think you're probably onto something there. I sort of do. Now, if there's one game difference, maybe not, but I do think where you finish will matter to the voters. And remember, they vote as soon as the regular season's over. Ballots will be in long before the playoffs start. So we'll have to wait a little bit to find out what happens. But yeah, the playoffs won't be a factor.
Fascinating stuff. We'll continue to follow, obviously, SGA's season, the MVP race, lots more, but that's all the time we've got this week. We've got all sorts of Thunder coverage at selloutcrowd.com, and you can find all that stuff on our pages as well, our columns, our videos. Podcasts are at barrytrammell.com and jenny-carlson.com. And if you want to see content straight in your inbox, you can sign up for our newsletters. It's easy, free. Just head to selloutcrowd.com and opt in. If this happens to be your first time hearing or watching us, be sure to subscribe to our show on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.